We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Aleph and Mesechet Kesuvos. This is Kesuvos Daf 31a. The Gemara continues with Rav Ashi's answer how you can have a situation of a zar that eats truma and the chi of tashlumin and the chi of misa come at the exact same time. The case can be where he's eating his own truma and the chi of tashlumin is not because of damaging somebody else's truma or eating somebody else's truma. Rather, it's because v'kara shiroin shel chaver, at the same time that he's eating the truma, he also tears up the silk of his friend, meaning the garments or the fabric of his friend, and therefore the chi of tashlumin is not really related to the truma, but it happens at the exact same time. Rashi over here says, "V'kara shiroim b'shah shabol," at the moment that he's swallowing the truma, so he tears up the silk. V'afagav demisa lav misham memona denizak asyole. Now, even though the chi of misa and the mammon are two totally separate things, the nizak's shirayim are separate from the truma that he's eating. Still, miftar, still he's going to be pater from the tashlumin. Usvira leila Rav Ashi, and that's because Rav Ashi happens to hold misa lazev tashlumin. If you have a chi of misa for this item, and then you have a chi of tashlumin for a different item, for a different individual, pater, he's still going to be pater on the tashlumin. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we said above. Amar Rav Chisda says, Moder Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakon. Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakon admits, even though he says there's no chi of tashlumin, if you have a violation of Yom Kippur, because you can't have a chi of tashlumin and a chi of kares together, but Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakon admits in the following case, Begonev chelbo shel chaveiro, again, let's say somebody steals the chelev of his friend, v'achlo, and he eats it. So here you have a situation of a chi of tashlumin for stealing the chelev, and you also have the chi of misa for eating it. Shu chayiv, in that case, he would be chayiv in tashlumin. Why? Shekvar nischayiv begeneva kodem sheyavol lidei yisur chelev, because the chayiv of geneva came before the yisur of chelev. The chelev was only eaten after he was already chayiv in the tashlumin because of the geneva. The geneva happened earlier; it didn't happen at the same time, and therefore he's going to be chayiv tashlumin. And so the Gemara says, Lema pligad Rabbi Avin. Let us say that this statement of Rav Chisda argues on that which Rabbi Avin says. The Omer Rabbi Avin, because Rabbi Avin says as follows. Hazorik chetz, let's say a person throws an arrow. Mitchilas arba l'sof arba, and he throws it from the beginning of 4 amos to the end of 4 amos, meaning he throws it 4 amos in Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos, and therefore you have a situation here of a chi of misa. V'kara shiroin b'alichaso, but also while it's being thrown, as it's moving, it ends up tearing silk as it is going, and so there's a chiyuv of tashlumin here as well. So the halach is pater. In that case, he's going to be pater from the tashlumin, meaning it's going to be considered happening at the same time. The same time you have the chiyuv misa for throwing it 4 amos on Shabbos, at that identical time, there's a chiyuv tashlumin, therefore he's pater in the tashlumin. Why? Shakira tzorech hanochi, because the uprooting, when you throw it, so then the landing and the uprooting, it's all part of the same action, and therefore it's all considered to be happening at the exact same time. And so the Gemara therefore says, Hachanami, if you're going to apply Rabbi Avin's logic in this case as well, when you're stealing the chelev, Hagabot Sorech Achilahi, when he lifts up the chelev, that is part of the process of eating it. He needs to lift it up in order to eat it. Just like in order for something to land, you're going to need to uproot it from its place. And therefore it should be the same thing. According to Rabbi Avin, it should all be considered happening at the same time, and there should be a p'tur from the tashlumin. But the Gemara says, Hachi Ashta, what kind of comparison is this? Hazam, over there, below Akira. It's impossible for something to land if you don't first pick it up. You need to have the Akira in order to have the Hanacha. It's impossible otherwise. But over here, below Hagba, it's possible to eat something without lifting it up. The lifting it up is not necessary for the eating, so it's two independent actions, and therefore, again, it's not considered to be happening at the same time. For example, if the person wants, he could bend down, and he can eat without lifting something up. And so therefore you can't apply the logic. Just because Rabbi Avin's logic applies to throwing the chetz min tchilas arba l'sof arba doesn't mean it's necessarily going to apply to the case of the chelev. And the Gemara continues, Inami, or you could say another distinction between the case of the chelev and the case of the chetz. Hasam iboy ladura lo matzi mahadr, over there by the case of the arrow, if he wants to retract what he's doing when he throws it, he can't take it back. Once he releases it, the action is finished. But over here, when you're talking about the chelev, when he lifts it up and steals it, so matzi mahadr lo, if he wants to change his mind, he can decide he's not going to eat it. So again, they're independent actions, and therefore, since they don't happen at the same time, it's possible that you're going to say that you're chayiv in tashlumin in that case. And the Gemara says, Ma'ika ben hai lishna lahai lishna. What's the difference between the two versions? One answer of the distinction was that it's impossible to have hanacha without akira. And the other one was that it's impossible, once he releases it, he can't take it back. What's the difference between those two distinctions? And the Gemara says, Ika ben hayo, there's a difference between them. Hamavir sakin b'Rosh Hashanah. Let's say you have a person, he doesn't throw something in Rosh Hashanah, he's just walking it. He's causing it to travel in Rosh Hashanah 4 amos, but he's not actually releasing it. V'kara shiroin b'halicha, so as he's walking, it tears the silk. So in that case, lahachlishna, according to the version that says lahachlishna da amrit efshar lahanocha below akira, according to the version that says that it's impossible to have hanocha without akira. So hachanami. So here also, where he's just carrying it, he's not throwing it. Efshar lahanocha below akira. It's impossible to have hanocha without an akira, and therefore it would all be considered like one action. And so then you would say it's all considered one, and therefore you can't have a chiv tashlumin the same time as you have a chiv misa. But according to the version that said lo motzi mahadrla, that if you're not able to take back what you did, that's what makes it all considered to be one action. So hacha motzi mahadrla, here we have a situation where you're just carrying the item, you're not releasing it, you're not throwing it. It is possible to take back what you did, and therefore you would not be able to apply the distinction in that scenario. And Rashi over here explains sha'akira tzorech hanachi. Again, we had this idea that akira is tzorech hanachi, and therefore if it tears the silk as it's being thrown, so then you're going to be potter from the tashlumin in that case. Hilkach, therefore, avagav the chiyav mammon makame hanachi, even though technically the chiyav mammon comes before it lands, asile potter, he's still going to be potter. Why? Because since between the akira and the hanacha, that's when the chiyav mammon, that's when the chiyav tashlumin took place, and it happens between those two steps. That's considered boin keachad. Sha'akira tzorech hanachi, because akira is really necessary for the hanacha. Therefore, from that moment, that's when the malacha actually began, and therefore it's considered as if the chiyav tashlumin and the chiyav misa happen at the same time. And then the Gemara said, but over here you don't need to lift it up in order to eat it by the case of the chaylev. Why? Because lamata migimel tfachim, just bend down below 3 tfachim, v'achal, and eat it below 3 tfachim. Uvatzer migimel lav hagboihi. The halach is that if it's less than 3 tfachim from the ground, that's not considered lifted up, and therefore you can do it without a hagbah. And then we said lo matzi ladur, again, when you throw something you can't take it back. Mishazark es achetz, once he throws the arrow he can't take it back. Helkach mishas akira sofo likroa lo shirain. Therefore, from the moment he released it, we know for sure it's going to tear the silk, and therefore again you have that idea that it's all considered the same action. But hacha matzi mahadrila, here, if you're able to retract what you're doing, hilkach lo amrin mishas hagba aschala lo achila. Therefore, since he can lift it up and decide he's not going to eat it, therefore we don't say that the process of eating began at the moment that he lifted it up. And finally, the Gemara had a nafkamina hamavir sakin. Let's say he's carrying a knife, so in that case, biyodo bahalicho, while he's walking, it's in his hand. In that case, it's possible to retract what you're doing, to take back what you're doing. But in that case, on the other hand, it is impossible to have a hanacha without an akira. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we said above. Amar Rabbi Avin says, Hazoreh chetz mitchilas arba l'sofar. But let's say somebody throws an arrow from the beginning of 4 amos to the end of 4 amos, meaning he throws the arrow 4 amos on Shabbos. That's a chiyav misa for throwing 4 amos on Shabbos in Rosh Hashanah. V'kara shiroin ba'alichaso, and then as it's traveling, it tears some silk. So in that case, potter, again, he's going to be potter in terms of payment. He doesn't have to have a chiyav tashlumin. Sha'akira tzorech hanachi, because in order for the thing to land, he had to lift it up. It's all considered one action, and therefore the chiyav tashlumin is considered to be happening at the exact same time as the chiyav misa, and so again there's no chiyav tashlumin in such a situation. And so the Gemara says, Meisav Rabbevi Barabayim. Rabbevi Barabai asks the following question from a brisa: Hagonev kis b'Shabbos. It says, let's say somebody steals a wallet on Shabbos, so in that case chayiv. In that case, he's going to be chayiv in terms of tashlumin. We don't say that since he's chayiv for carrying on Shabbos, he's chayiv misa, therefore he's potter from the tashlumin. No, we don't say that. Why? Shekvar is chayiv b'geneva kodem sheyavu lidei yisur skila, because he's chayiv in stealing before the yisur skila. The case over here is when he lifts it up. The moment he lifts it up in whatever rishus he is in, he acquires it. That's the geneva. But it's not going to be an yisur skila until he takes it from one rishus to another rishus. Therefore, that happens at a different point in time, and he's chayiv in tashlumin. However, let's say he's dragging the wallet out in such a fashion that he actually only acquires it when he switches rishus. So in that case, megarer v'yotze. So in such a situation, again, megarer v'yotze, he's dragging it and taking it out of the rishus. In that case, potter. In that case, he's potter from tashlumin. Shari Yisr Shabbos, so geneva boin keachad, because the Isser of violating Shabbos and the Isser of geneva happen at the exact same time. The moment it switches rishus, that is the moment that he acquires it as well, and the moment that he's chayiv misa in terms of violating Shabbos. And so the Gemara says, V'amai, but again, why is that the case? If you're saying a concept of Akira Tzorech Hanacha, Hachanami, here also, Leima Hagba Tzorech Hotzai, we should say that the Hagba is the beginning of the process of the Hotzah, and therefore it is all considered one. Even in the situation of Hagba, it should all be considered one action, and he should be potter in that case as well. And so the Gemara says, no, and here the case could be as follows. The case is that when he lifted it up originally, he wasn't thinking that he was going to take it out to a different rishos. He was going to put it aside. He was going to store it away. And then he later decides that he's going to take it out. So in such a situation, it's actually a separate action in terms of the hatzah, in terms of the hotzah, in terms of the chiyuv misa. But the Gemara says, 1 second, but if the case is that when he originally lifted it up, it wasn't for the purpose of hotzah, would he even be chayiv for doing hotzah? Would it even be considered a violation of Shabbos? But Rav Simon said in the name of Rav Ami, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, let's say a person just carrying some items from one corner to the other, he's not intending on doing any hotzah to Rosh Hashanah, but then he changes his mind in the middle, and he takes it out, so pater. So in that case, he's pater in terms of hotzah. Why? Because the original akira, when he lifted it up, it wasn't with the intention of hotzah, and therefore he's not chayiv in hotzah. So therefore, the case that you just gave, there's no chiyuv hotzah at all. So it's not a good example of a situation where you're dividing up the chiyuv of the tashlumin and the chiyuv hotzah. There is no chiyuv hotzah. And so the Gemara answers, Lo teim al manas latzniyo. Rather, don't say the case is that he was originally lifting it up to put it aside. It wasn't for hotzah purposes. Ella almanas lotzio. Rather, ella ema almanas lotzio. Rather, he was lifting it up in order to take it out. But hacha b'mayaskinon kisha amad. But the case over here is that as he was taking it out, he actually stood. He stopped what he was doing. And Rashi over here explains, Lo tema b'hagbio almanas latzniyo ella higbio almanas lotzio. Rather, he did lift it up in order to take it out. That was the case. Udekasha loch nema hagbah tzorach hotzahi. And your question was, then the hagbah should be all part of the hotzah. Again, it should all be one action. Hacha b'mayaskinon. The case is he actually stopped in the middle. Therefore, when he stands in one place, that becomes the hanacha. That becomes like putting it down for his original lifting up. Therefore, when he originally lifted it up and he acquired it, that wasn't really part of the chiyuv Shabbos, because then he stopped and then he started again. It's only he does a new akira when he begins walking again. That's called akiras gufo. At that point, again, he's walking on the understanding that he's going to take it out to the Rosh Hashanah. The halacha is that when he starts moving again, the uprooting of his body is the same thing as uprooting of the object, and therefore, again, the chiyuv misa and the chiyuv tashlumin are not going to be in one action. But the Gemara says, 1 second, if the situation over here is kisha amad lamai, what did he stop for? Why is he standing still? If it's just in order to adjust it onto his shoulder. So orchayu, that's normal, and that's not even considered stopping at all. Rashi over here says, the fact that you stand in that situation is not considered a hanacha, and it really is. We really follow the original akira in terms of the violation of Shabbos. And so the Gemara says, Ella ba'omed lafush. Rather, you're going to have to say that the case over here is that he stood in order to rest. It wasn't in order to adjust what he's carrying. And so in that case, it's really considered a hanacha and a new akira. But then you're going to say, but you're going to say, but if he stopped in order to adjust it on his shoulder, so what would be the case? That apparently would be different, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis.